Welcome back to another edition of the Hart to Heart Podcast. And my guest today is Dr. Casey Means. She's an ENT specialist, but she's also the author of the brand new book, Good Energy, The Surprising Connection Between Metabolism and Limitless Health. So, Dr. Casey Means, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So it's great that you're here today. I have gone over your book. I've read some of it. I've also listened to you on Andrew Huberman. You've been on Jay Shetty. So it seems like you're kind of, doing your rounds now, which is awesome. So what's that been like?
Oh man, it's been a whirlwind. I mean, it's really it's so incredible to see that people are so interested in metabolic health. I am beyond ecstatic about this because on the biggest platforms in independent media, you're seeing people so interested in what are the basic habits that keep us healthy. And if you tune into mainstream media, you don't see any of that. And so I think it's really interesting. There's almost this split that's happening between what people are attracted to, when they're seeking out their own information versus what sort of like the main channels are telling us. And so it's great to see that the book is sort of a part of that independent thinking message of how do we actually just like learn the basic things to take care of our bodies and have some of the biggest returns possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, while we do have, unfortunately, a growing population that's getting more and more obese, and we will chat about that, I do think we have this like small portion, I don't know if it's 1 or 2%, or maybe it's 5% of people who are just like, thirsty for knowledge on anything related to nutrition and fitness. And I think that, those people are sort of just like eating up your book. And the other part of it too is that, you don't just kind of surface level things, like you really go into detail. And, it's great that people are interested in the level of detail. And that's probably the part that's like surprises you the most. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think there's been like a very patronizing, patronizing, and sort of almost like infantilizing vibe in healthcare where it's like, oh, patients aren't smart enough to understand this. So the doctor keeps all the information and then just gives little like breadcrumbs to the patients. But what I've actually found in clinical practice and, just being a human on this planet is that I think people are actually very hungry for information, good information about how to be healthy. And people can understand so much. And so a big message I have is that like, if you're above like a 5th grade level, you can understand like what most of the basic metabolic biomarkers mean and how to interpret them. And you don't need to outsource all of this. And I think people are actually so happy to have someone say like, yes, you can handle this. You can track these for yourself, because there's been such a message that I think is based in the fact that if we can convince people that they're not capable of understanding their own bodies, they're so much more controllable and honestly profitable because they're going to have to put all their sort of agency outside of them. And so, yeah, I think it's been cool to see how much people are excited about basically being given permission to feel like they can really be the owners of their own health data, which I believe really everyone can. And I think the messaging from the system that's like, no, it's actually not even safe for you to have access to your data is really, it's very dark. And people I think are ready for a new vision.
Yeah, I think it's really harmful too. And obviously I am going to get into your book right away, but I do resonate with what you just said. And one thing I always do with my patients, the ones who are listening are going to laugh, but I really ask them to always get a blood pressure machine and to log their blood pressures, because it provides so much information. You come into your doctor, maybe once every 3 months, for some people, maybe less. And, you take a reading, you may have time to take 2 or 3, but oftentimes it's just like one snapshot reading. If someone owns a blood pressure cuff, which, thankfully now you can get on like Amazon for like $30 or $40, maybe $50. And you get, a pretty accurate reading, and they also get your heart rate, which is great. I certainly encourage my patients to, learn as much about their health as possible. Knowledge is power. And when you apply that knowledge, obviously, then it becomes, meaningful and some type of change. I think that we should encourage our patients to, gain more knowledge and then hopefully hopefully use that knowledge to, make changes in themselves, right?
Exactly.
But it is the book that I want to talk about today, Good Energy. You kind of have these three big pillars that you've talked about. You talk about mitochondria, and you talk about inflammation, and you talk about oxidative stress. Those are, where I kind of wanted to start today. So for mitochondria, like a lot of people hear that they're, the powerhouse energy of our cells, so for people who, want more energy, obviously they're going to want the best functioning mitochondria possible, or optimally functioning mitochondria. So what are people potentially doing in their daily lives that's decreasing or inhibiting their mitochondrial function?
So you nailed it. Basically, like if we want to have better energy in our lives, literal just energy and zest and ability to go do the things we want, we have to have mitochondria that are functioning properly, literally making cellular energy to power our bodies, just like any car or machine. And if the mitochondria aren't working properly, that's just not happening as well. And the data suggests that that is the case in 93% of Americans right now, that the mitochondria are not optimally functional, that metabolic health is not good. So that's wild. And so that gets to your question.
And where does the 93% come from? Sorry.
That's from the American College of Cardiology. 2022
Wow.
put out a paper that looked at 55,000 patients, and they looked at different biomarkers of metabolic syndrome. And to define optimal metabolic health, they essentially said that you needed to have all of the biomarkers in that criteria in the normal range, not even optimal range, just normal range. So this was things like fasting glucose less than 100, hemoglobin A1C less than 5.7%, total cholesterol to HDL ratio of 3.5 to 1 or lower, waist circumference less than 35 inches in women or 40 inches in men, blood pressure less than 120/80, HDL cholesterol above 40 in men, 50 in women. I think that was most of them. And if people met those criteria, not on medication, so not on like a blood sugar lowering medication for blood sugar or a blood pressure medication for blood pressure, they were part of what only makes up now 6.8% of Americans who are essentially have what they called optimal metabolic health. I think if we actually are talking about optimal, I would actually have tighter ranges for some of those things, but that's what they defined it as.
5.7 A1C is like,
it's pretty high. Yeah. So if we're actually truly saying how many people in America have like perfect metabolic biomarkers, optimal range, all of them are, I would say it's probably, we're looking at like 2 to 3%, but I don't know that for sure. But that study showed 93.2% have at least one biomarker that is not in the optimal range. So that's pretty wild. So, and really this all comes down to how the mitochondria is working. And that gets at your question of what are the factors that are making the mitochondria dysfunctional in the world we're living in right now? Because this is not the way it has been forever, most likely. And it's really, I would say, a confluence of so many different aspects of modern industrial urbanized living. Like that's how I would, highly technological living. We are, when you really just like look into the science and the physiology, it's across the spectrum of what we're eating these days, the way we're moving, the lack of movement in our life, our emotional health being poor and our chronic stress being through the roof. The fact that we're not sleeping as well, not only less quantity, but less quality and consistency. We are surrounded by mitochondrial disrupting environmental toxins made by industry that are virtually unregulated. So in the US or actually globally, there's over 80,000 known synthetic chemicals that have entered our food, water, air, personal care products, home care products over the last 75 years. We're taking a lot of medication, many of which can impact our mitochondria. So, a lot
one of which I do want to talk to you about, which is statins, but I don't want to, but I do want you to finish what you were saying, but I do want to talk about statins after, because I know they do have a mitochondrial impact.
Yeah. So like a lot of actually even over-the-counter medications, some antacids, pain relievers, things like that. So we're just like taking a lot of this stuff like candy. And I think we don't realize that also adds to the burden on our mitochondria. Then you add in the fact that we've totally changed our relationship with light very recently. We're virtually never outside. Americans spend 94% of their time indoors, meaning not actually getting light energy from the sun, which is a master regulator of circadian rhythms, which control our mitochondria. And then we're screwing up our nighttime, cycles of circadian rhythm by blasting our eyes with blue light when we're supposed to be in the dark. And then you've got this weird relationship with temperature that we have now, which actually directly affects our mitochondria because we're always at 72 degrees in our homes. There's no swings in temperature, and actually heat and cold are big, boosters for our mitochondria. So really, when you look across, this is what I just described, essentially 8 pillars: food, sleep, movement, emotional health, toxins, medications, light, and temperature. The world that we're living in today, the rapidly evolving technological world, it's crushing our mitochondrial health. And therefore, we aren't making cellular energy properly. This is showing up as our biomarkers being off. This is showing up as the root cause of almost every chronic illness we're seeing torturing and shortening American lives in the United States. And it's the biggest blind spot in healthcare, where we're not talking about the mitochondria. We're not talking about these root causes. We're not talking about the environment, because we have a very much like a reactionary, sick care, whack-a-mole, siloed healthcare system that is not set up to look at connecting root causes. And so this is so far from the curriculum of medical students in the US, and yet it is the thing that is crushing our health today and making our lifespan shorter every single year over the past 3 to 4 years. Life expectancy is going down in the US, and I think it's fundamentally rooted in this mitochondrial destruction.
Is there any way to measure mitochondrial function, like objectively?
Yeah, there are ways to do it. And clinically, they're not really relevant for the average consumer. Like you can take a muscle biopsy and actually look at like mitochondrial enzyme activity. And that's what they'll do.
There's no like blood work we can do. Like we can't order like a CRP like we can for inflammation. There's nothing we can do for like a blood test.
There's not a specific mitochondrial test. No, I mean, you can do things like what's your aerobic capacity, like VO2 max and things like that. And if that goes up over time, like that's a good sign that you're doing more aerobic respiration. And so that's that's a marker. I would argue though that some of the basic biomarkers that talk about metabolic health, like simple tests like a glucose or a triglyceride, blood pressure, if you think about like the physiology of what those are telling us about the body and look at them sort of together and read the tea leaves, I actually think they can tell us about what's going on with the mitochondria, because as mitochondrial capacity or quantity or essentially ability to convert food to energy goes up, those biomarkers will change, because we can actually then process more substrates through the mitochondria. So fasting glucose will go down, fasting triglycerides will go down, insulin in the background will go down, which will then decrease blood pressure. So I think in a sense, while they're not a direct measure, some of the very cheap basic biomarkers that we actually test regularly do tell us about the mitochondria. What's so funny is that doctors aren't really trained to think about the labs that way. They think of them as like, if this is high, we must bring it lower. And if LDL is high, then this means it's a statin deficiency. And like, what I really suggest for people and doctors to do is don't think about these as little knobs to turn. Think about them in terms of what it's saying about what the cell needs to function better. So the answer is no, there's not a good clinical test for the mitochondrial function, but there's a set of tests we can do to understand metabolic health more globally.
And I know this is, kind of hard to recap, but just the things that you said would, more or less optimize our overall mitochondrial health. So sleep obviously is, maybe number one. So getting the right amount of light, so getting morning sunlight in the morning, not getting any bright light before bed would be good. Having a good nutritious diet, obviously, we can get into detail about that, but what we're saying is, try to avoid ultra processed foods, mostly eat whole foods, try to eat 1 gram of protein per day. Kind of the basic things that you and I have said on podcasts before, likely. Emotional health, I think is an interesting one, because, that relates to like hormonally, like for me. So like, if you are someone who's always stressed, then your cortisol goes up. And as we know, cortisol decreases testosterone, and low testosterone can obviously cause low libido, low inability to put on muscle mass, low mood, can be linked to even low dopamine. So, there's a lot of things there that, that can be addressed. And then what would be the other things that I'm sort of, leaving off. I talked about that, as you said, movement,
Yep.
right? So movement, and again, too, I know you talked about this, I think, with Andrew Huberman, and he does, I think, 2 to 3 cardio workouts a week, and 2 of them are more like zone 2, and then he has one that's more intense.
Yeah.
And that's more or less what I do as well right now. Like sometimes I end up not taking a day off just because I just can't. But for the most part, that's what I do. And then what would be the other ones that I'm kind of missing to optimize our mitochondria?
I mean, we got to look at detoxifying our lifestyle, because so many of these things that just surround us now have mitochondrial disruptors or other, chemicals that are going to hurt our metabolic health. So this is like getting rid of all the scented, colored products that we clean our homes with, that we put on our bodies, the Axe body spray, the deodorants, the shampoos, conditioners, soap, body wash, makeup, perfume, all of it. Like, I mean, I don't want to say throw all of it out today, but if you want to, do it. But like, there's not a single artificially scented product in my entire home. And
Same here.
It's absolutely game changing. I don't think people understand how we get sensitized to these things and we barely even notice them. When you get off them, you realize that this stuff is so potent, and it gives you a headache and a stomach ache. It's not good. And, we know that the volatile organic compounds that are used to make these synthetic scents that are in also candles, air fresheners, dishwashing detergent, laundry sheets, hand soap, it's everywhere. So every single day in our home.
Are you okay with essential oils?
Oh, I love I'm a big fan of essential oils, but I really
perfect.
try for like 100%, ideally wild harvested, like essential oils. And those are really expensive. So I use them very sparingly, but I use them for, I use lavender to help me fall asleep at night. And I'll put a few drops of scented essential oil in like a vinegar and water spray that I use to clean the house. But yeah, I think that's, there's medicinal and you want to use those thoughtfully as well, because they do actually have like strong, impacts on biology. But it's the synthetic scents that are virtually unregulated. There are loopholes in the way that products are labeled that make it so that you don't actually have to put what compounds are actually in the product. You just can put fragrance, and that can include lots of things, some of which are endocrine disruptors. So that is like one of the simplest things you can do. And, I know it seems costly to do that, but I think the easy way to do it is like next time you run out of laundry detergent, just get the next one you get it unscented. Get one that says eco-friendly, non-toxic, biodegradable, whatever, something on there, and it will probably be a better option. So that's just a big one that is under-recognized. There was a great paper that came out like 2 years ago about this concept of obesogens, which it was the first paper showing that it is not a correlative relationship between these chemicals in our products and obesity. They're now able to clearly show a causative relationship. We know the mechanisms by which these chemicals in our products are causing our mitochondria to be disrupted and therefore make more fat. So if people are stuck on that like weight loss journey or their fitness journey, this could be a simple thing that you're not thinking about.
What about air purifiers? Like my fiance is obsessed with Air Doctor. Like she's got it in a bunch of our rooms here, and she even has one that she brought to her office where she works as well.
I think that's fantastic. I think, we know that indoor air is more polluted than outdoor air. And so cleaning the air is great. Air particulate matter is a huge risk factor for all sorts of chronic diseases. I think another easy thing you can do, because air doctors are expensive, and I think that HEPA filters are good, and they can sometimes be like there are cheaper versions of HEPA filters, but Air Doctor is one of the highest quality ones. But the other thing people could do is just go outside more. And I think it's so wild. Like we live on this beautiful, beautiful planet, and yet the research shows that we spend 94% of our time inside, and that means in a car or in a home, but basically not in the fresh air. And to me, that is just so crazy, because the air is cleaner out there. So if before maybe spending $1,000 on air fresheners, just try and spend 6 or 7 hours outside every day. I've been outside all day except for this podcast, because I have a table right outside my office, and I just put my computer out there and I work out there, and then I
You
try and
probably
spend.
feel amazing doing that.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Just the sun on the skin. I just feel so good, and it's so energizing. And, I feel like the laying in the sunshine in the middle of the day is, to me, feels like more energy boosting than even taking a nap.
For me too. And for me, and I've been one of these people where when I go on vacation, I like going somewhere hot. Now I do live in Canada, so that probably includes most Canadians.
Yes.
But there's something about I know I'm on vacation, I'm not, working, and so of course I feel better kind of thing. But I always still felt like there's something about just being in the sun outdoors that makes me feel so good, and so I can totally relate. As much the more time I spend in the sun, basically the better my overall well-being. There's almost like a direct correlation.
Yeah.
Did you have your treadmill walker with you outside today?
No, I have
On
my
your desk?
treadmill desk right behind me. But if I'm indoors, I try to get on the treadmill desk. And but because I do have a standing desk outside, which is awesome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's
That's dope.
I have a mechanical sit to stand desk right now, but I used to have one that was like a hand crank. So I just put that outside. So it just lit. And so my boyfriend and I both work from home. And so we'll be kind of always doing this rotation between standing outside, sitting on the grass, at the standing desk, on the treadmill. So it's this constant but because so many of us are knowledge workers now, and we do need to be on computers a lot of the time. The reality is that a lot of the solutions to our issues of why we're feeling crummy is actually just getting creative and just getting it might look a little weird to other people, this sort of musical chairs of desks and indoors, outdoors, and having to put a sunshade up so you can actually use your Zoom outdoors. But this is the world we're living in. We're super sick.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
If whenever I build my next house, the most important thing is I have to have some kind of sun room where I can be in the sun, but work. That's going to be my very first requirement, essentially.
Yeah, we bought basically a burlap sunshade, because it's so hard to work outside if you don't have sun covering because you can't see your computer screen. But, a $30 little triangle, and it's wow, okay, that solved that problem. And that's what I mean by just getting.
That's awesome.
Everyone's got a reason for why it can't work to be outside more, or it can't work to walk more. And it's we got to figure this out, And the way I always look at it is we know, based on molecular biology research and cellular biology research, we know what our cells need. Our cells need exposure to photons. They need movement all throughout the day. They need clean water. They need real nutrient-dense food. So I'm just going to share the facts. That's what our cells need. And then it's our job to figure out how to get those things into the realities of our everyday life. And that means getting creative, and it's going to look different for every single person. But the needs aren't changing. So it's our job to then use these big, incredible brains that we have, biggest, most complex processing on the planet, to figure it out.
And in terms of, toxins and pollutants, what do you think about fluoridated water? Because I actually just made the switch maybe last year. So we have a tap now where everything comes out. So everything's stripped off. So we do have to put some trace minerals back into it. But do you think that is something that can have an impact on mitochondrial health, or do you think that it's something that's kind of negligible and people probably don't need to worry about it?
I am not an expert on this topic, although I do know several biologic dentists who are very savvy on this research. And from everything I understand, we should be getting the fluoride out of the water. I actually am not certain what the impact on mitochondria are, but from what I understand, it has neurotoxic effects that have been pretty well documented. And people will say, oh, well, it's not enough amount in the water for that to happen. But if it's in all the water we're drinking, and it's in our toothpaste, and it's in other things, our fillings, and what happens when we go to the dentist, it's cumulative load that I'm always thinking about. And so, yeah, we have a whole system under our sink with reverse osmosis. I think filtering your water with a high quality filter is definitely one of the best things you can do, because there's so much junk, at least in America, in the water. And you can actually look it up on websites, and it's really gross. And so just because our body is 70% water, we're drinking liters of water a day, that's just such a low hanging fruit. Get a really good filter. Britas do not cut it. Something like a activated charcoal filter like a Berkey or a reverse osmosis filter that you may have to add in trace minerals. But especially if you get one put in under your sink, which is usually just like a few $100s, you just never have to think about it again. So it's that one-time investment that pays off for a long time. So yeah, I really try and avoid, especially thinking about having children soon and the effects of fluoride in pregnant women. There's studies on this, in fetal development and all this stuff. I definitely avoid it, but I would say I'm not an expert on that.
Okay. And then just coming back to the mitochondria, people always want to know supplements. Like I know there's, Life Extension has one. I think it's literally called Mitochondrial Optimizer. Lots of people are into taking CoQ10. I know I mentioned earlier, statin drugs, Crestor, Lipitor, these types of drugs people take that can, potentially cause mitochondrial damage. And a lot of people think that if you are taking a statin of any kind, you should absolutely be on, CoQ10. And I would actually wholeheartedly agree with that statement. But coming back to my original question, are there any do you take any mitochondrial optimizers, or do you recommend any mitochondrial optimizers?
I do. I take a lot of supplements. And the reason I do that is even though I eat almost an entirely whole foods diet, is because our food is so depleted of nutrients, even if you're eating a totally whole foods diet. And I even buy most of my food from the farmer's market, all regenerative meat, all of that. But because our soil has been destroyed because of industrial agriculture, even if you're doing the best you can, the food today has less nutrients than it did previously. And there's data to support that. So just in terms of covering my bases, I do take supplements. I also test my micronutrient levels through a lab called Genova. And I use their nutritional evaluation test, which tells me about the functional levels of all the key nutrients, vitamins, minerals, omegas, things like that. So I do supplement in a targeted way. But when I think about supplementation, I'm always thinking about first principles, what does our body need to function properly? And micronutrients and vitamins are so interesting because we never get really taught why they matter. But one of the ways I love to think about how they matter is that the mitochondria, for them to work properly, and the electron transport chain that makes ATP, there's actually all these vitamin and mineral cofactors that have to bind to those enzymes that make ATP to create these tiny microscopic conformational shifts to let these protein machines work. So to make ATP, we actually need those vitamins and minerals to let the process happen efficiently. So that's amazing to me to think, wow, what low-hanging fruit. Just give the body the nutrients to basically turn on these proteins in the proper way. And then we also
B
know
vitamins would be one potentially.
Well, I'll give you the list.
Okay.
But I think I actually don't think it's useful to give people a list if they have no understanding of why they're taking it.
I completely agree. So
I'm never going to do that because it's just I'm not here to tell people to take B vitamins. I'm here to tell people why vitamins make a difference in their body. So, but yeah, I'm happy to give you a list of what I take. So I think that a multivitamin is super valuable. I like to find a really high quality multivitamin. I take Wenatal, which is a very high quality prenatal vitamin. And they have one for men as well. That is actually very interestingly, you mentioned coenzyme Q10. They include CoQ10 in the men's formula because there's been studies that show that CoQ10 actually significantly improves sperm quality, likely because of its effect on the mitochondria. So a high quality.
And Alcar too, I think also increases semen motility. And that I believe also has a positive effect on mitochondria.
Which one's that?
Alcar.
I actually don't know that one. Oh, acetyl-L-carnitine. Yeah. It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So multivitamin, I take creatine every day for muscle synthesis, and make sure I take it soon after a workout when I lift heavy weights. I take Timeline MitoPure. This is a really interesting specific mitochondrial supplement. It's purified urolithin A, and urolithin A is a compound that directly promotes mitophagy, which is the recycling of mitochondria. And you can make your own urolithin A by basically fermenting elagitannins from berries, and your microbiome can turn those into urolithin A, but you have to eat a lot of berries to get enough. And so this is a purified version. So that's really, really, really amazing. And I take that every single day. And then I also take supplements that I know support the mitochondria by reducing oxidative stress, which of course can damage the mitochondria. So that's I take curcumin at a pretty high dose. I take omega-3 fatty acids to just support like the membrane of the mitochondria and the cell membrane. And then because of my personal lab results, I take a B complex on top of a multivitamin because I'm just still low on, I know I'm low on like B6 and B12. And so I do add a methylated B complex because those are so critical to mitochondrial function. And if you're low, my homocysteine was a little high. And so I just think that's like low hanging fruit to kind of get a lot of benefits. And that's based on my lab work. So those are the main. Oh, and then I actually also take 1 to 2,000 milligrams of liposomal vitamin C. And vitamin C has been known to reduce mitochondrial oxidative stress because it's a potent antioxidant. So sounds like a lot, but I kind of just take them all in one handful. And I'm thinking about all of them though, through that lens of like, how do I support the function, the structure, and the surrounding environment to how my mitochondria is functioning. So yeah.
Well, listen, I'm totally with you. Okay. So I'm doing the CoQ10, I'm doing the Alcar, the methylated B complex, the curcumin, and the omega-3 fatty acids. So I think I'm only missing one, the urolithin A. I think that's the only one that I'm missing from your list.
And creatine?
The creatine, I take creatine too. I mean, I've taken 5 grams of creatine for like 25 years straight.
Wow.
Like I remember being in like grade 10 and like scooping it out of my like gym bag and just like putting it in my mouth and dumping it in. So I've been taking creatine for a long time, but thanks for sharing that list. So getting back to your book, I know we talked about mitochondria quite a bit now, so thank you for all that. I really do appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit about inflammation, if you don't mind. So inflammation, as we know, can be very harmful. I've talked on this podcast before about CRP, C-reactive protein, has been shown, and I've seen in some studies, I'm not saying in all, but in some studies, it's been shown to be, just as detrimental as say like, very high LDL or an ApoB, something like that. So, we definitely need to look at CRP and take inflammation seriously. But, for people who haven't read the book, what's sort of your main message on inflammation?
Well, I think that we've all heard this sort of thing that's been great over the past decade, I would say, where we're realizing that most chronic diseases in the US are some way linked to chronic inflammation. And I feel like this has kind of been this interesting revelation over the past decade where it's like, oh, obesity is an inflammatory disease, heart disease is an inflammatory disease, Alzheimer's is an inflammatory disease. Like we keep finding inflammation in these areas where there's chronic disease. And I think that's very interesting, but there's a deeper part of the story, which is why is there chronic inflammation happening? And when you dig deeper in that way, one of the things we find is that it's actually still the mitochondrial dysfunction that is underneath the chronic inflammation. Because when you have a cell that's got problems with metabolism, it's not making energy properly, that is a cell that is going to have less gas to do its work. And so not having enough energy to do its work will lead to dysfunction. And a dysfunctional cell, essentially a cell that cannot do its work, is not powered to do its work, will be under distress. And the way that it actually gets help with its, or tries to get help for its distress, which is caused by a problem inside of it with making energy, is it will release chemicals into the environment to basically recruit help. And one of the crazy ways that cells do that is through this process called the cell danger response, which is where a cell that is underpowered will release ATP outside of the cell, which is really never supposed to happen. ATP is usually 1,000,000 times higher in concentration inside the cell, but it will release ATP, and that is a big pro-inflammatory signal for the body. So all these immune cells will come and rush to help, but of course the immune cells can't help at all because the problem is actually inside the cell. It's a problem with not being able to make enough energy because the environment around us is crushing our mitochondrial health. So you get this issue where you rev up the immune system to solve a problem that it is totally impotent to solve. And then you get this vicious bidirectional issue of chronic inflammation and intracellular mitochondrial dysfunction that just is essentially those two together are the interlinked root cause of most chronic diseases and symptoms in the US. And the chronic inflammation will not resolve until the environmental factors resolve. So the cell then has more capacity to actually do the work it needs to do. What's so crazy to me, like given my history as an ENT doctor, is that in ear, nose, and throat, almost all the conditions we treat are inflammatory disorders. It's like sinusitis is inflammation and swelling of the nasal tissues, and otitis is inflammation and swelling of the middle ear, and laryngitis is inflammation and swelling of the throat. And how do we treat these? With steroids. And steroids are medications that reduce inflammatory levels. And of course I thought, going through the conventional system, I'm like, this is great. We have this great tool to fix the problem, not realizing that it's actually doing nothing to fix the problem. Because until you fix what's causing the chronic inflammation, all you're doing is putting a Band-Aid on it that certainly can relieve symptoms, but we want to make people really healthy. And that's two different things. And so, through my lens now, I think about, wow, I would have talked to those patients so differently in my clinic who had all these inflammatory symptoms in their head and neck. I would have said, I would have dug a lot deeper into every aspect of their environment, their diet, their lifestyle, their emotional health, and really looking at any triggers that could be possibly putting their body into a sense of threat and alarm that's revving up their immune system. And one other thing that we know about chronic inflammation is that even though I believe a lot of chronic inflammation is actually caused by the mitochondrial dysfunction and the alarm that the sort of cells are sending out, once you actually rev up chronic inflammation and all those inflammatory cells are releasing cytokines, inflammatory mediators, those worsen insulin resistance. So the cytokines actually negatively impact the insulin receptor. So then it worsens the metabolic dysfunction. So it's very bidirectional, almost like a ratcheting up of the problem. And I think truly this is why we are so sick, is because none of the medications we're using, even like the steroids and all the chronic disease medications, none of them get at that real root cause issue. So we just, we're kind of putting lipstick on a pig here, and it's not the answer.
And so a couple things there. So first of all, I would think that the answer to the question, like how do we reduce inflammation, would be the same answer to, how do we improve or optimize our mitochondrial health? And then the other thing there, you talked about some conditions, chronic sinusitis, allergic rhinitis is one condition where I've seen, I have to look it up, but I know a couple years ago, there was some crazy studies that showed that spirulina was incredibly effective for allergic rhinitis. Wow. And I never really looked into it, but I'm just thinking now, based upon what you just said, like that's a very, very densely nutrient supplement. There's a lot of B vitamins in it and that kind of thing. And I wonder if, it just improved the mitochondrial health and potentially, improved, allergic rhinitis. Maybe not like severe cases, but, mild cases. And for people who don't know what allergic rhinitis is, it's just basically when you have, allergies and you have nasal congestion. And so some people have found, some relief with spirulina. And I wonder if that is the reason why, now that you said that.
It's fascinating. I mean, spirulina and chlorella are both algae that, like you said, they're packed with protein, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, very condensed. And people are actually using these for all sorts of conditions. There's a great company in the US called Energy Bits, which super cleanly harvests these things. And I do take them. You need to take a lot of them to kind of get an appropriate dose, which is the only limiting factor. But if there's a way to get those in your diet, it's a very high density way to get food-based chemicals into your body. Good like nutrients into the body that support mitochondrial function. But I've never that's really, really, I'm gonna have to look that up because it makes a lot of sense when you think about inflammation being a response to mitochondrial dysfunction and mitochondrial dysfunction being the result of the mitochondria either being overburdened by toxins and substrates it can't handle and basically being crushed, or not having the appropriate nutrients and support it needs to do its best work. And it can kind of get at that piece of it.
And, I will stick on inflammation for a bit, but it also plays into the oxidative stress part because of the antioxidant component in there. I forget what that blue-green pigment is called. I think it's got a very, very long, like, scientific name.
Yeah.
But it's I think a very potent antioxidant. But we'll get to oxidative stress just in a minute. Just have a couple more questions with regards to inflammation. So when inflammation comes up, a lot of people bring up curcumin, which you just mentioned. So, that's one I think that, has been shown to actually lower CRP in some studies. And then the other one that I've seen that actually has lowered CRP, is kind of surprises me, is boron, which has been shown to lower. Yeah. And even in patients with like rheumatoid arthritis, it's pretty crazy. It does lower CRP. And if you go on examine.com, which I'm sure you've been on before.
So good.
They have, it's interesting. So they have boron, I think, listed as number 1 to decrease CRP, but they may have curcumin as number 1 to decrease inflammation, which is, kind of, kind of interesting, because you would kind of think like, the one that would be the highest in, decreasing inflammation would also be the highest in decreasing CRP, but they don't have it that way. So, that's something that I need to learn more about and figure out why, but, boron seems to be coming up like quite a bit.
I love a conversation where I have like multiple things to look up afterwards. This is amazing. I'm so like, I have not dug into the boron thing, and that's fascinating. Okay. Yeah.
And the other, this one sort of ties into inflammation, but this one really surprised me. There's only really one really good study on it, but nattokinase, I know a lot of people are using this for its antithrombotic effects, but there was a 2022 study with over 1,000 patients, and they took 10,800 FU, that's a weird unit, I know, per day, which usually it comes in a dose of like 2,000 or less. And what they found in that study was that it decreased carotid artery plaque by 36% over 1 year. It was crazy. And so, I wonder, how much effect that may have on inflammation. Again, I don't have any, hard data on it saying that it does, but, just something that I thought I'd mention because it kind of ties into inflammation.
Wow. And that's natto, like the fermented beans.
Yeah. And I saw a specific study showing that it decreases vascular like inflammation specifically by like upregulating proteins. So it's and it's got antihypertensive effects. Like, it seems pretty wild. Like, I don't want to make it seem like this miracle wonder drug, but it does seem like it could be, a big deal in the future.
That I have read a little bit of. One thing I'm wondering about that is if you have to eat the whole food or if there is a supplement version, because the food itself is, I don't know if you've ever had it, but it is definitely an acquired taste. It's one of the odder foods I've ever tasted. Like, it's not like drinking kombucha. It's very intense. And it'd be interesting. I just have to learn if there's some other way to sort of eat it or make it more palatable, because it's strong. It's very strong.
I really don't like sauerkraut very much. So what I do is I just throw that in my shake, Whoa. And so some people find that to be a little bit odd, but I don't taste it. I don't taste it in the shake. Like,
that's amazing. That's okay. This is fascinating. Yeah. I do a big shake every morning after my workout to get my protein and my creatine. And I've always wondered if I could what more I could throw in it. Like, can I throw all my supplements in there, so I don't have to swallow.
So spirulina is a powder. That's how I get it. I just get it as a powder. And then you can use like a higher dose or a higher amount if you want.
That's great.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So
we need an episode of just exchanging tips. This is amazing.
Exchanging shake tips. It'd be great. So let's get back to your book too. So I do want to talk about the third part. So the oxidative stress. So again, I think it's going to come down to the same questions, the same answers with regards to, what is going to, cause mitochondrial dysfunction, what's going to cause inflammation. The same thing with oxidative stress. So, a lot of people have heard of antioxidants before. They may not be so familiar with, pro-oxidants or oxidizing agents. So, what do we really have to look out for in the environment maybe that we haven't discussed in terms of, causing oxidative stress on our bodies?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is all the same lifestyle factors we talked about, because when we're eating ultra processed foods, like many of these are very pro-oxidant foods, like the industrially refined seed oils and foods that are really high in refined sugars and grains are going to generate oxidative stress in the body. But we get down to that cellular level again. This is that third leg of the stool of metabolic dysfunction, chronic inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress. And again, it's also bidirectional with both of them. It's both a cause and effect of both of those other processes. So when our mitochondria are damaged by all these environmental factors, they're then a machine that's basically not working properly. And they create essentially these reactive molecular byproducts in a higher quantity, which are free radicals. And that creates oxidative stress. So the things that are damaging the mitochondria are also generating oxidative stress, but a lot of those things in their own right also generate oxidative stress. So it's so interesting that it all comes back to a lot of the same stuff. I think on the what can we do about it, I think this is where you can get some really targeted foods into your diet to help mitigate oxidative stress. So the things that we know are potent, like things that have very high levels of vitamin C and phytonutrients and cruciferous vegetables that specifically upregulate an antioxidant gene called glutathione they upregulate NRF2, which is a genetic pathway that helps our other antioxidant genes be upregulated. So we want to both eat antioxidants and eat foods that upregulate our genetic expression of antioxidants. So that's kind of the two things we can do, and then reduce our exposures to things that contribute to oxidative stress. But anything we do also to lower chronic inflammation and lower mitochondrial dysfunction will also improve oxidative stress. So it's really thinking about them all in concert. But for people who really don't know what free radicals or oxidative stress is, I mean, the way I think about it is it's these in excess of reactive molecules in the body that have unpaired electrons that are going to go around and try to neutralize themselves with other compounds in the body, like DNA or proteins or fats. And in binding their unpaired reactive electron to stuff, they create these basically dysfunctional molecules. So you want to find a way to reduce those free radicals or neutralize them with your own antioxidants. And that is going to, it's just crazy to think that we have these bodies that are filled with way too many reactive, damaging unpaired electrons. And of course that's going to cause issues with our health. But that's the world we're living in. It's so pro-oxidative. But, sleep also really helps with our oxidative stress, because it's when we clean out a lot of these build up, metabolic byproducts that build up throughout the day. And exercise is very interesting, because exercise can kind of acutely ramp up inflammation and some oxidative stress. But over the long term, exercise actually upregulates a lot of our genes that reduce these processes. So you might get a little hit, but then it's sort of like a hormetic stressor where it actually makes it better over time. So all the things, exercise, sleep, non-toxic living, reducing stress, all are going to help on that one as well.
And so with regards to cooking, I know a lot of people are very aware of seed oils, but also to the boiling points of certain oils. So maybe, you could talk about the biggest mistakes that people make with regards to cooking oils and how they're generating a lot of, reaction oxygen species by, cooking with these inflammatory oils, and then also, exceeding the boiling point, which is making them, oxidative and very inflammatory.
Yeah. So, I mean, step one, the basics, don't use any industrially refined ultra processed seed oils that come in plastic bottles. So this is canola oil, vegetable oil, corn oil, safflower oil, cottonseed oil, grapeseed oil. What's so funny about all of those is that I don't think there's any person in the world that can visualize what a cottonseed is or a canola, or what does vegetable oil even mean? So like if you can't imagine it, like it's probably not good. And the reason that's relevant is because if you're trying to get oil out of vegetables, you can't just squish a carrot and get oil out of it. You have to chemically extract it with hexanes and really, really harsh chemicals. And then they're dewaxing the oil with heat and other chemicals. They're bleaching it, and they're putting it in a plastic bottle where it's exposed to light and can get further oxidized. So that's just like a never eat situation. Then you think about more natural oils, where I like to think of it as if you can squish an oil out of a particular plant and it's refined that way, where they're basically just using force to push oil out of it, which would be like coconut, avocado, olives. Like you can push hard enough and oil will come out of those fatty fruits. That is going to be like, if you can get that done in a minimally refined, unheated, cold press process, and they're being stored in a dark glass bottle, that is the best type of oil from a plant-based perspective that we can use. I would say coconut, olive oil, avocado oil, like more natural production, and then make sure you're storing them in a safe way away from light. And then the more saturated fats like ghee and tallow, and what am I forgetting? Like pork, like lard and things like that. Like those are ones, because they're more saturated fats that are going to be less prone to oxidation. They can handle a higher heat. And so those are going to be healthier in the context of an otherwise very pure diet. I think when we get in trouble with saturated fats is when we're including them in a standard American diet, also filled with pro-inflammatory foods and sugar and high insulin levels. But in the context of a totally low glycemic, low insulin diet, these appear to be quite safe and are not the real drivers of the heart disease. When it comes to those plant oils, and people talk about like, well, can I heat them and are they going to get oxidized? If you are buying the highest quality oils possible, and a lot of even these like olive oils now, the non-organic olive oils that come in big plastic bottles, many people are doing independent studies and showing that some of these are like actually cut with the cheaper oils. So you want to find brands that are reputable, that say that they've
in a
got
dark
like
bottle.
Yeah, in a glass bottle, that say single origin, tell you where it's coming from, that taste sharp when you taste them. You know, you taste an olive oil that's really got a bite to it. Like that's a really good sign. Those oils, especially if organically grown, actually have very high levels of antioxidants in the oil. And so when we heat the olive oil, we don't want to ever heat an oil too high. You know, you don't want to go crazy where it like starts smelling and is smoky. But those antioxidants in the oil actually help protect the oil from getting oxidized by heat. And so the more natural the food, the more it almost has like built-in protection mechanisms for some of these things. So I would say be judicious with heat. Certainly, I would say with almost all fats. And then just always it goes back to sourcing, quality, storage, all of those things.
Yeah, like I know we only have a couple minutes left, but like for the oils in my diet, I just use avocado oil, olive oil. You know, I get my saturated fats through eggs and through the meat and bison and things like that I eat. And and then my fish oil. And like I said, my fish oil comes in like a very dark bottle. You know, I store it in the fridge. And so, you know, that's what you want to do to reduce any oxidative stress. Okay, so I know we only got a couple minutes left, so just tell us where we can find your book, where we can order it, and where we can learn a little bit more about you and your Twitter handle, your Instagram, all that kind of stuff.
Well, CaseyMeans.com is basically the hub for everything I have, and there's a book page there and all my social media links. I'm on Dr. Casey's Kitchen, Dr. Casey's Kitchen on Instagram, and on all the other social platforms, I'm at Casey Means MD. And then my book is just everywhere books are sold. Good Energy, The Surprising Connection Between Metabolism and Limitless Health. And yeah, it's a lot of the stuff we talked about today. And then just like a real action plan for how to build in these healthier habits into our life. And and so that's pretty much it. I also have a newsletter that comes out every other week called Good Energy Living. That's kind of just more iterations on a lot of these themes and what I'm thinking about and how to implement this stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that because I know Dr. Huberman said it too. Like you do have a lot of actionable, like implementable things like in your book, on your website. So like if there's things that you miss in the podcast today that you do want to implement, definitely check out Casey's stuff. You will find the things that I think that you're looking for. And everyone, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And Casey, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this information. It was so awesome to chat with you today.
So nice to meet you, Mike. Thank you.